Welcome to the Regen Brands podcast. This is a place for brands, retailers, investors, and other food system stakeholders to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Sara Delaney, who is the founder and CEO at Sarilla. Sarilla is supporting regenerative agriculture with its lineup of ready-to-drink spritzers that are all made with organic and regenerative ingredients. Sarilla sources the majority of its ingredients via direct trade relationships with farmer cooperatives in Rwanda that are USDA organic and fair trade certified and pursuing regenerative certification. In this episode, Sara shares how she was inspired to launch the brand to further her work supporting the people of Rwanda in their ongoing recovery from the Rwandan Genocide in 1994. And she shares how Sarilla has grown over time to find the right name, SKUs, and product positioning. Sara's personal story is one of resiliency, empathy, and community, and is definitely very alive in the Sarilla brand. She subscribes to the Rwandan wisdom that to be alone is to die, which underpins Sarilla's social impact mission and should serve as really good advice for all of us looking to increase collaborative efforts in regeneration. We love spending this time with Sara, and we hope you enjoy this one as much as we did. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Sara from Sarilla with us. So welcome, Sara.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I love this podcast.
We love that you love this podcast.
No, I'm actually a listener. You know, it's so much fun to be on.
Okay, do you have a favorite episode or like a one that comes to mind recently?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I love the one that you guys did a deep dive on tea, actually. Mm-hmm. So it was Yogi. Mm-hmm. And that's actually where I discovered that they work with some of the same farmers that we work with in Rwanda. So it created a conversation after the podcast with the person you had on.
Amazing. I love that answer for two reasons. Number one, like the in-category love, I think is super, super cool. And part of that like collaboration that like we can do this together. It doesn't have to be like we're at each other's throats for market share. And number two, the fact that it spurred conversation and collaboration, not just from a like, hey, let's do this together, but you know, let's collaborate and work with our suppliers together. That's awesome. But we already were talking before we hit record, and we're going to go down like conversations that we're going to have a hard time stopping. So before we go there, for those who are not familiar with Sarilla, give us a quick lay of the land. Like, what does your brand produce and where can people find your product today?
Sure. So Sarilla is a sparkling beverage. It's made without any alcohol, no preservatives. It's a very clean label product. We have 7 flavors now. Our original was inspired by the silvertip tea, which I discovered when I was living in Rwanda. I'll save that for later. But it is real brewed tea leaves with herbs, fruits, spices. Most of our flavors are either low or no sugar, ranges from 0 to 90 milligrams of plant-based caffeine. We also test for antioxidants now after packaging, which is really exciting.
Hell yeah.
So it's been an evolution we can talk about. We do call it a spritzer today, and that has come a long way. I love that word, though, because it brings to mind that it's light, that it's refreshing, that it may have tiny bubbles. And we do call out the 0% alcohol on the front. Yeah. So I'm very focused right now on building in hospitality and convenience. I love that channel. We're working with Vistar, PFG across the country. Nice. We work with corporate campuses, college campuses, some vending, some obviously grocery. We're in natural grocery. You'll find us in Sprouts nationwide starting in April.
Nice. Oh yeah. Congrats.
Yeah. I would say food service and hospitality is where we got our start in kegs in 2018. And we still produce the product small batch in kegs as well to have on tap. Wow. So it's really fun building with that sort of hands-on, like testing ground, getting immediate feedback. It's a great way to sample the product too.
Before we go into some of the origin story, we got to talk about some of these flavors because they sound extraordinary as somebody who has yet to try the product. But I mean, there's like a ginger spritzer. green
Yeah.
tea. Yeah. Hoppy
We tried to make that
hibiscus.
happen.
It's okay. I mean, I kind of like the fact that I'm like, I really want to try this, you know, like it's a good vibe to bring to the episode.
Mhm.
Like the vanilla rooibos infusion. Like, do you have a particular like favorite flavor, or is there a top seller, like a leading horse, or maybe top 2 or 3?
Mhm. My original is the lemon.
Okay.
So that's kind of my original baby, but and I will say that's popular across the country. It's so interesting how flavor palettes change from like city to city, region to region. You know, people in the South where I am tend to like sweeter flavors than like the Northeast where I came from. People are not as sensitive to like a little bit of sugar, right, in the Midwest compared to the two coasts. So I will say the green tea, which I have in front of me, and I'm not going to drink it now because it's like after 12. And this definitely gets me a little buzzed from the
Yeah.
green tea. It's high caffeine, completely plant based caffeine, nothing synthetic. And it's blended with organic hibiscus flower and organic pure monk fruit. But our newest flavor is the hoppy hibiscus, and that's what I have almost every night. I'll have that like with my dinner. It's got a very light citra hops flavor. Doesn't taste like a beer. So I'm 18 plus years sober, and personally, I don't want the flavor of alcohol. And so I wanted to create this beverage that was also sober safe for people like me, that we are just bored sick of sparkling water and we don't drink like Diet Coke or Monster anymore. And so what
Yeah.
else is there?
Yeah. I have certainly been that person many times, and I'm sure Kyle has as well. Because Kyle doesn't drink, and I've gone extensive periods of adult life, and I actually am extremely underwhelmed by many of the non-alc options that are always offered. It's like I don't want to drink something that just tastes like a beer but doesn't have alcohol. Like that doesn't. Yeah, like I'd rather
Yeah,
drink
my
something
brain
that's
is so confused by that.
right. But the sales, like they're selling well. So like someone, I guess we're not the target demo for that, but
I will say
there's.
it's the zebra striping is what's working, and I think it's a funny term because it's like, okay, you have a regular beer, and then you have like, let's say a non-alc beer or something else like 0%, and you go back and forth throughout the occasion, throughout the night. Um, but like I used that term with someone the other day, and they're like, "What's the difference between zebra striping and just like normal drinking?" And I was like,
Right.
"Yeah, like
Right.
true. I mean, that's nothing new. You know, even drinkers have like water in between their drinks. So I think that's what it is. It's just like to get maybe less buzz or to get like less hungover the next day, or feel like it's safer to drive home."
Wait, and from my perspective, having never drank in my life, right? So I don't have like a baseline to compare
Wow.
to where I'll drink
You've
like a
never
non-alc
had a
beer.
drink?
No, I don't drink. Never drank.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for me, it's just really nice to have something that is interesting to drink with a little bit of potential benefit instead of like, oh, I'm gonna have some water, or like, you know, for a long time it was just kombucha, which is relatively high sugar. So to have some like interesting, relatively complex flavor profiles, it just feels really nice to kind of like, if you're at a party, you can bring something and feel like you're sort of participating without sacrificing, you know, your morals and or health or whatever reason you're not, you know, drinking alcohol that day. So I
Totally.
love these sorts of products.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to make something that was adding to your life too, because there are a lot of non-alcs that really don't have the greatest ingredients. I think there's some great brands out there doing amazing things. Um, Even just using like herbs is such an ancient tradition where there's so much natural function in the plants that we don't have to use synthetic additives to get that same effect. Um, and then there's this question of like the functional beverage category and what does that actually mean? Does it have to be mood altering, or does it have to have CBD? And so I think that whole category is still taking shape.
Yeah, it's a huge catch-all term. To your point, like what is the specific function? You know, like it could be anything from high fiber, high protein to mood enhancement, adaptogens. Like it's so big and ambiguous. I want to cue you up for the origin story, but that's Anthony's question, and I feel really like I don't know what to do. So, Anthony, you stop me from talking and lead us in.
Yeah, no, I think we're definitely going to spend more time on kind of how the product has grown in this journey and what the positioning has been and is now and will be in the future. I definitely want to talk about that, and particularly how like the social impact piece and the regenerative piece play into that, Sarah, and how we all think about that. But I had the pleasure of watching your TEDx talk to prep for the interview today, which I had no idea about that entire journey. Just really powerful stuff. I commend you for your resilience and your ability to share so vulnerably. And this brand is really based on such a cool social impact mandate. And, your personal story is just wild. So we'd love for you to take us back and share what you would like just about, your journey and why you started the brand and what you're doing with this, really the work in Rwanda and other places as well.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for taking time to watch that. Was that just
Yeah.
today?
Oh yeah. This morning. Mm-hmm.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
That was such a good experience. I definitely recommend doing a TEDx for anyone who is
Yeah.
kind of thinking about it. And that was, I will say, 6 months before March 2020. So I was the last group on the stage
Wow.
before, and then they started doing virtual TEDx. But my topic was, for listeners, how community really is the antidote to despair. And so heading into
Mm.
2020 and all of that disruption to our lives and being separate from each other, it like I got a lot of feedback. Of course, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was just really
Right.
good timing that I had that topic. And so much of what I learned around community building is either number one from my recovery network of getting sober, and being a member of AA, but also like my time living in Rwanda and learning from the people there that, there's a saying that to be alone is to die. And that's like a very ancient sort of tribal survival mechanism. But I think we've forgotten as we do so many things so independently and alone here in this country and other countries that are much more like based on me and I rather than we and us. So that's something that I've always thought about is, how, well, together we're better, right? And stronger. And so it really is kind of a luxury in a way in this country to be so independent. It's almost like praised. It is, right? I can do
Right.
this. I got this. I'm self-reliant, where it's so strange in Rwanda. Like I travel there, I still go back a couple times a year and I'm usually with a group, but a couple of times I've been by myself but I always know people. Like I'll get together, I'll head to the farm. And if I show up like by myself, they're like, "What? Are you okay? What's wrong? Like, where are your friends and family? Like, why
Yeah.
would you be alone?" And it's not like a safety. I'm perfectly safe there. It's a really safe country, probably safer than anywhere else I've been. But it's just that, like, why would you want to be alone? So that's been a great lesson for me, and I still think about it. And that's when the shutdown happened. It was very, very hard for the farmers that we worked with there because they were also told to stay home. And that's like, there's so many layers to that. I mean, for someone living in poverty, it was like a very dangerous situation, not to be told like not to get together and be farming and leaving the house because they needed that every day to survive. But yeah, it was 2009 that I lived there. I was hired. I had just moved to Asheville from Vermont, and I was hired by an American couple to come and help build a restaurant that they had started the year before.
Wow.
And they really initiated this as more of a public health solution and looking at, we have all these NGOs coming into Rwanda and helping with post-genocide development, but people really need jobs and training. And there at that time, there was very little in the hospitality sector. And so they built this restaurant as a hands-on training facility for orphans who had lost their parents during the genocide. And the couple was moving back to the States for a year. So they hired me to run the business, stay in their house, like basically manage their life while they were gone. And it was like, I just knew, the job was meant for me. And I'd never been to sub-Saharan Africa. I said yes. And 30 days later, I was on a plane.
Yeah. Sarah,
Crazy.
For those that aren't familiar, will you just give a brief overview of the genocide? Like, I was 1 year old when it happened, so I was relatively
Oh,
unfamiliar before the interview
wow.
today. And we'll put some links in the show notes. But just for those listeners that are unfamiliar, could you give the context on like what happened there and
Yeah.
why it matters so
Yeah,
much?
so it was 1994 and it was in April that it started, but there's a long history before that dating back to probably the 1950s, right? So of course, it didn't happen overnight, but in the span of 100 days, starting in April in 1994, about 1 million people were killed it was 1 million Rwandans by their fellow Rwandans. So it was neighbors killing neighbors. And there were two, like, I will say tribes. That's controversial, okay, but it was Hutu and Tutsi, and the Hutu population was the majority, about 80%, and they were directed to kill the Tutsi, which is about 20% of the country.
Jeez.
So, and this was 1 million people, and that represented 10% of the population. At the time, there were only about 10 million people. It's a tiny country, okay? So it's the size of Vermont, where I grew up. Vermont has less than 1 million people in the whole state, and Rwanda is about the same size in terms of landmass. It's very mountainous. It's beautiful. It's densely populated. Most people are farming.
Mm.
Um, and it's bordering many other countries. So during that time, I mean, I've met so many people that survived the genocide, and they fled to neighboring countries if they could, like Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, hosted many people. Burundi was also part of the war, so it is considered a civil war. Um, there's like a long history of colonization and how those two groups of people were kind of pitted against each other. But I will say that everything I've read and learned from people there is that they were living peacefully at one time. So there were Hutus married to Tutsis. It was like incredibly amicable. But so that was what happened that year, and it's been what, 30, almost 31 years. And now what we're looking at is the generational transfer of trauma. So it's still very, for someone who hasn't had trauma healing, it's very fresh. Trauma does not know any time. So it's like,
Right.
it could have been yesterday. So many people are now living back in the same communities. And like many people went to prison or they fled. And immediately after, like the following year, this is an interesting fact too. Women in Rwanda were not allowed to own land.
Wow.
I think it was 1997. So it took about 3 years from the genocide for them to, because they were left with land. The men, in many cases, were either killed or they left or they went
Right.
to jail. So the women are left with land that technically they didn't own, and they were the head of household. Many children were head of household. So that was, had to be a very interesting time. I think there were only three psychologists in the whole country, like
Holy.
following the genocide. So
Woo.
when I
Talk about
moved there,
under resourced. That's
under resourced, yeah.
wild.
In 2009, when I moved there, it was, beautiful, clean, safe. But the people I work with before I left said there's two things we still really need. We need jobs and we need trauma healing. And so when I moved back to the state, eventually I had another stop along the way, but my first mission was to create a nonprofit to work with women there that had experienced trauma, particularly sexual trauma, which was a big part of the genocide as well. Many women were intentionally infected with HIV, AIDS,
Goodness.
were pregnant from rape. And that's a whole
Gosh.
nother set of issues with children being born of rape.
And so that's just, I mean, insane and just so tragic.
Yeah.
And thank you for the work that you're doing to support, those folks. Just to clarify one thing, it's more dealing with the residual effects of the conflict that lasted about a year. There is no ongoing conflict or war kind of
Correct.
remaining
Yeah.
bloodshed currently occurring
No,
there or
actually, the
whatever.
current president, Kagame, he came in, he's Rwandan, but he was living in Uganda, came in with the troops that helped end the genocide
Mm,
and put it to a stop that year. And he's still president to this day.
mm,
So
wow.
he's beloved, from what I
Wow.
can tell.
Yeah.
And I think he has maybe another term left.
Mm,
So it's been safe, peaceful, lots of resources coming into Rwanda. Throughout Africa, I would say Rwanda is really seen as a success story in so many
wow.
ways. It's very good healthcare, very good education. The restaurant that I was there working at is now like one of the best in the country and spans over
Mm,
like an entire street. They have like two
wow. Okay.
hotels. They had Prince Charles stayed there a couple years ago.
Wow.
Um, we have lots of like celebrities coming in to do the gorilla trek, which is a big tourist destination. And so there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of reason to visit. And it was an amazing place to live. My quality of life there was so good. I mean,
Mm,
beautiful home, gardens, food. You know, I know we're going to get into the farming and food part, but that like the we had the best ingredients coming into the restaurant. Everything was
mhm,
natural, no pesticides, no preservatives, like fresh every day, farmers coming in to deliver. It
mhm,
was an awesome experience. It and everyone, I think I've taken maybe 13 crop to cup trips so far, and out of all those people, everyone always says like I need to go back. You can't just go once. It gets under your skin and people fall in love with this country. It's
mhm.
amazing.
I love crop to cup.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So how
I
did you
should
go
say crop
from?
to can, but
Hey, I like it. Don't mess with it.
okay.
I like
Okay.
it. Um, so how did you go from living there in 2009, working at the restaurant, starting the nonprofit to support these women to a CPG brand? What was that journey?
Well, in the nonprofit was really about creating an exchange. It's called Africa Healing Exchange and still exists as a 501c3. Um, what I saw when I was living there is like so many NGOs had a presence there. They didn't want to leave like the 60-mile radius from the capital. We have a joke in Kigali, the capital, which is like it's like how far do you have to go to get a latte, and that's about as far as like the NGOs would go. So
Yeah.
it you know it was me kind of being on a mission to go where other people didn't go and to
Mm,
help. Not, I don't even want to say help, okay? It's an exchange because I was getting so much as well. My
mm,
experience living there showed me the healing that I still needed to do with my own trauma, my own, like, what I talk about in my TEDx. Um, and so they became my teachers, my healers. And I was like, when I left, how can I stay connected to them? Because I need this. It's like a lifeline. I need to keep working with people in Rwanda.
mhm,
I also want to expose other Americans to that culture that helped me so much. And so I want to create this bridge with the two cultures. So for some time, it was a nonprofit, which is really a model that we built in Rwanda. And it was really based on the wisdom of Rwandans, not a Western approach that was
mm,
somehow, catering to another culture. Because I saw that that was not a sustainable approach either.
mhm,
So it was, a model we call restoring resiliency instead of using the word trauma, which also is very exhausting to keep hearing that word. It's one
mhm.
of those like, uh, is it an onomatopoeia? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You say it, the word, and you feel like you guys probably feel heavy right now. It's like we need to move out of that like trauma
Right.
experience. And
Mhm,
I learned that with my TEDx coach too. Is like if we're gonna take people down into like a hard story or a sad story, like you better take them up pretty quickly. Like you can feel the energy go down, and it's like
mm,
okay, now we got to come back.
mhm.
Um, but I found
I just
that
want to call
too.
out that I super appreciate both of you navigating that down and back up because I was sitting there like, man, like this is like, how
See,
are we going to talk about spice cider
I
after this,
know
And like, and I don't
exactly.
mean to like poke fun, like make a joke of it because I mean, it's really like, it's like, oh, I feel that, So I
Yeah.
appreciate the wisdom
Yeah.
you're both bringing to navigating this conversation.
Well, and I mean, speaking of like Sarilla, like we have our branding, it's like sun rays, it's elevated, it's light, it's
Mm,
bright, it's joy, it's inspiring happiness. And that came from like, okay, we all have, there's light and darkness, shadow, and, with everything.
mhm,
And that really was like rooted in this experience I'm talking about in Rwanda, where it's like on one side, it's so heavy, and there's like this dark stories, and you'll get into a cab and all of a sudden the driver's just telling you what happened in 1994 like it was yesterday, and you're like, whoa, like I was not prepared for this. But then you step into like, the farm that I work, and it's women singing and dancing in bright colors, and they take their
mm,
drums out, and then in the next minute they tell you like someone just died, and you're like, wait, but are we celebrating or are we mourning, are we grieving? And it's like all the feelings, all the colors
mhm,
and of an experience. So um, I think, and it's part of the reason I love Beverage so much too, is because
mm,
we're consuming it all day, every day. It's liquid. We're 80% water.
mhm,
It's liquid coming through our body. We have the opportunity to impact so many lives with this beverage, not only with these stories and connecting cultures, but with the physical liquid like coming into our bodies.
mm,
Yeah, I agree. When we first, booked this brand, when AC booked this on the podcast, I love this category because it can be so impactful. To your point, you're consuming not just like buy one, consume it the same day, potentially two or three in the same day. So the opportunity to
Yes.
drive sales in a direction that can really like move agriculture, like scale agriculture, is huge. Um,
Mhm.
but want to take it back to AC's question because we keep going down rabbit holes in a great way. Like, what was the journey to the CPG brand? What did that arc look like?
Oh, I kind of burnt out on fundraising, which is ironic because I'll be fundraising forever right now.
yeah,
But like with
yeah,
the nonprofit, honest, like what happened is it was very like purpose driven, meaningful work. Um, but I it must have been a couple trips. I came back with tea as gifts for people. And I
mm,
remember going to my friend Andrew, who owns Dober Tea House here in Asheville, brought him some tea from Rwanda. They sat down, cupped it, and were like, do you know like how good this is? I mean, and I'm not like a tea geek. Like I loved it, but I grew up on like herbal tea bags. So I didn't
yeah,
know how damn good this was. And I was like, really? Okay. And so over the course of that summer, I just started like playing around with it, making cold steep teas, really using that silver tip tea as my halo ingredient, and I felt great. I was trying to cut back on coffee, but I still wanted that caffeine kick. So it just, and then what happened is I was like, I think I'm onto this, started bringing it to people and just letting folks sample it. I met this great guy. I was actually working as a fundraising manager for a local private school, and one of the parents, somehow we got talking, and um, he was like, "I'm really interested in the work you're doing in Rwanda. Why don't we sit down?" I would say he was my first like unofficial mentor,
mm,
and I remember seeing like, I think it's really time to build a business with this mission,
mm,
and get beyond just like fundraising for a nonprofit, because we're still lacking this economic healing with this model. We're doing
mm,
the mental health part, stress management. People are feeling stable, but they need to earn more money, and that's where these
mm,
products with purpose can come in and help with that full circle healing. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of nonprofit work. It's like, okay, we're helping people feel better, but then like they need to go on and earn an income, and we need to create jobs here. So I remember just laying it all out with him. Like, I have these beautiful baskets, fabrics, jewelry, coffee,
yeah,
tea, like all these things. I want to shine a light on Rwanda and let people know that it's this like beacon of hope and light and full of all these great products. And it's not just about the genocide, because people hear Rwanda and that's all they seem to think about. So he was like, this is awesome, but like, you really need to focus, like pick one thing and build on that. And I was like, it has to be tea. It has to be, because
Yeah.
the health, the trends, like it's sustainable. We grow it year round. The farmers are earning income year round. You know, I love coffee, but it's not that. And everything in the US was headed towards tea being like a trending ingredient as well. And I
What
love
year was
working
this? Just
with
so
it.
we have like some frame of reference
Like
for.
2017,
Okay, yeah.
2018, I started kegging. Yeah. So I decided tea. I'm all in on tea. I want to do hot tea, cold tea. Um, I started with a loose leaf tea. I learned how to import tea. I took my home recipes to the local brewer school, and he had all these like beer beer brewer students, and I was like, so I have this tea and I want to put it in a keg. Will you show me how? And he's like, sure. So he took me, and he's still like with me today. He took me under his wing, and I would just come in like on the off hours and we would keg together, and he taught me about SOPs and sanitation, like everything.
I want to go back to 2017, 2018, because today launching a sparkling herbal tea feels very on trend. But to have that thought back in 2018, like what was the compelling reason? Like to me, that would have been very novel back then. You know, why was that so important to you to put tea in a keg at that point in time?
Yeah, it was because I'm here in Asheville, like surrounded by breweries on every corner. I'm sober. My friends are sober, and we only really have like coffee shops to meet at. And I felt like I'm not the only one that's kind of feeling left out in these situations. So I thought, you know, why do we have to have it be, why does it have to be beer? You know, there's got to be something else we can have on tap. And so I I will say, like, I wasn't so welcome, like walking into these breweries with my tea in a keg. It was definitely weird. And I will tell you, like, every time I would walk in and they'd offer me a beer, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, that's why I made Sarilla. And I had a couple breweries that were all in, you know, and they had taps allocated for kombucha already. So they knew like the idea was there. But it's amazing. Like, you know, only a few years later, now if I walked into a bar or brewery and I'm like, hey, I have this non-alcoholic product, they're like, oh, no way, I'm looking for something. What is it? It
Right.
happened so fast. So I'm glad that I entered at a time where it was harder, because I think that I had to build a lot of grit and like toughen up my skin, you know, to just keep going. And it was just a test of like, are you sure you want to do this? Because this is not going to be easy.
Right. And I mean, you helped to pave the way for other non-alc options down the road. And then I mean, I think you were very early on, but you definitely caught the trend at the right time, right? And now I'm curious because it sounds like the primary, original concept was food service, breweries, keg. When did you decide to transition? Like, hey, I actually want to put this in a can for maybe a different, maybe more convenient or take home
Well,
occasion.
yeah, it was I like that saying, like, rejection is protection. You know, it was March 2020, and I was in a situation working out of a brewery here that was not so great. Like, I didn't want to take time to make a change, but we were growing out of the equipment they had. It was not, let's just put it this way, like, my pasteurization consisted of like giving cans a water bath in a big tank. Like, that was not going to scale. I mean,
Yeah,
we
that
were
sounds arduous.
giving them a bath with our hands. So it was painful, but I was like, we were so busy, and we had just gotten into our first grocery chain, and it was like, I don't have time, like, to research. And but then when March 2020 hit, the tap shut down. The restaurants were closed, and the brewery stopped making beer, and they went all in on making sanitizer, and there was no more canning line. So it was like God saying, okay, what are you going to do now? You have no choice. Like, you need to make a change. And luckily I had found, there was a brand called Mati back in the day, and it was really good. I think it was like a yerba type drink, kind of
Was
before
it
your,
like an energy drink? MATI?
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
rings a bell.
Okay, so I was starting to look for, okay, we're going to need a tunnel pasteurizer. And they were in North Carolina, a couple hours away. And they had the exact equipment because they were also steeping tea and then pasteurizing, but it was a different kind of tea. So when March 2020 came around, I was like, okay, I need to move into a place like that. They had since closed, but I tracked their equipment. I was like, who bought that equipment?
Smart
Somehow
move.
I was like a wild goose chase, tracked that equipment up to New Hampshire, and it brought me to a new co-packer in New Hampshire in Seabrook, and they had line time because the pandemic had just hit. It was actually the perfect time to get in with them. And that's when I started working with my first actual co-packer. And we had just gotten into the fresh market. So we had about, well, there's 160 stores plus like,
Right.
some of our other independent accounts. But that's when I was like, we need to go all in on cans because that's the only way people are drinking this now. We need to, look at e-commerce options and just meet people where they're at, which is basically online. It was very tough, like launching. I know you've heard that story a million times, but it wasn't the ideal time to be launching a new product in a grocery store. Plus, at that time, we only had 2 flavors. Don't ever launch a canned beverage with only 2 SKUs because you're getting like 4 inches of shelf space. And it was like the warm shelf on the very bottom in the center of the store. And it was our old packaging, which is a scary gorilla looking. Like, it looked like an energy drink. And it was I did everything wrong, you guys. It was called Silverback Beverage because I named it after the gorillas in Rwanda, which inspired me. And it was the silverback gorilla. You see it in the jungle and it completely moves you. It's resilient, it's inspirational, it's strong, it's living with nature, it's plant-based. But like, you might not know that unless you've trekked out into the jungle with the gorillas like I have. So we had a local artist create these illustrations of the silverback gorilla, and that was my first brand. It was highly misunderstood, and we've evolved since then.
It's kind of similar to all of us trying to make regenerative a thing. It's like it sounds
No doubt.
good, and if you know what it is, it's really good. But if you don't, it could be problematic.
What is it? How is it misunderstood? What's the most common thing like people think it is, but it's not?
They think they're gonna drink something, they're gonna grow a new limb or like a tail.
Yeah, I get cannabis a lot. Like when I say regenerative agriculture, people think cannabis for some reason. I don't know why, but that's like the most common, like just like human interaction. And then just because of the work that we do, like with the research and the Google alerts and the newsletter, like news tracking stuff, like I see a lot of it being slapped onto medicine, like stem cells, certain types of surgeries, like they're calling all that regenerative medicine now. So I don't know if that's going to be problematic. But I think more than anything, people just don't know. So it's like not even a misconception thing. It's just like a complete unawareness or a complete lack of knowledge. But it's a good segue because I want you to educate us on the actual farming that's going on over there, Sarah. And so maybe fill us in on like, did you already know some of these farmers because of the sourcing you had done at the restaurant? So like, how did you build the supply chain? How did you start working with these farmers? And then fill us in on kind of how that works today and what their farming practices look like versus regular tea farmers or other tea farmers in the region. Like what's the ag story here?
Yeah. Well, and just as I get into that, I think the word, I've been thinking so much about the word like leading up to this conversation. And to me, it means bringing life, like giving life back, bringing life back or getting back to life. And so whether it's within our own body, so it could be cellular, it is on a cellular level. And, I love, like, I think it was something you shared, Anthony, at the RSFI conference in Denver last year, which was in terms of marketing this, it's making that connection between the soil and our gut health. And it's so obvious to me. I mean, that's how I was raised, on a farm in Vermont. It's everything I grew up with was regenerative. We didn't use the word, we didn't have a term. It was just the way things were done. And I've always kind of lived in these communities like Asheville, Vermont, Colorado, like Rwanda, where it's partnering with farmers, it's going to the farmers market, or they come to us, and or growing our own food and filling in the gaps maybe with a grocery store. So when I moved to Rwanda, it was a lot like that. It was like such a gift to be working in the restaurant industry and having farm. I mean, I remember this one, it was so hard to get a few things, like mushrooms were very hard to find. And I remember one day this farmer came in from the forest and he had a brown paper bag and he's like, I have something to show you. And it was a brown paper bag full of wild mushrooms. And it was so exciting, you know, to have these like fresh mushrooms. And it was so hard to communicate with him. I think we were new, didn't really know any words, and we're trying to understand, like, you know, what is this? How did you, like, where did it come from? What type of mushrooms? Are they safe? Like, and most importantly, like, how can we get in touch with you? Like, how can we reorder? Do you have a phone number? Anything? There's no business card. You know, you're like, God, I hope this person comes back next week. And of course they do. It's like amazing. And cheeses, there's just like, I didn't take anything for granted there. Everything seemed special. And we started a garden in the back of the restaurant with lettuces and mixed greens, which was pretty unusual and innovative, because I'd say prior to like my time working there and developing a culinary program, was more of a culture of, you eat because you need the calories. You need, you know, to feel full, not hungry. And so that's why there's so many starches. It was potatoes, rice, lots of white things, you know, stack your plate as high as you can because you might only have one meal that day. So for us to come in and try to build more of a high-end dining experience was quite challenging, because we were coming from a place of, we want color, we want variety, we want a diverse plate, and introducing new ingredients. So it was a balance of kind of stepping back and like learning and listening and like, what do we have to work with here, and not being too unusual, but also offering something new and providing some education about nutrition. So it was like, it was just it was an amazing year working with a lot of great farmers, ingredients, and of course being sober. Like, instead of having beer at the end of the day, I'm like turning to tea, or, you know, trying to find something else that I can like be part of. And often I would sit with women that I work with and we would share tea together, or I would go home and make my own tea. And that's when I really, you know, became exposed to the world of loose leaf teas. And they had the black tea and the silver tea. And then there's this garden that I didn't actually discover until a couple years later when I returned, that has this amazing green tea. And then they're also doing a white tea. And there's great coffee, by the way, coming out of Rwanda too. So I definitely wake up to coffee and then switch to tea throughout the day. But, you know, after moving back to the States, you know, I already shared about like staying connected with people in Rwanda, made a point to go back at least once a year. Eventually it became like 2 trips a year. On one of those trips, when I made the decision, like, okay, we're all in on tea, you know, I started visiting different gardens, and my experience was that many of them were very closed. Like, they were not really open to having tourists or guests. You had to have an appointment. Didn't want you in the factory, definitely couldn't stay there, no tours. And then somehow I discovered this garden in the northern province of Rwanda. I contacted them to visit, and they were just so welcome. You know, we drove up there, the gates open, they had a guest house there, factory tours, everything. and you could just feel it. Like, and I've heard other guests on your show say, like, when you're in like a regenerative farm setting,
Mm,
there's a feeling of health and life,
mm,
and people just seem happier,
mm,
and you know, looking well fed as well, like just feeling like more wealth and abundance. And that was definitely the vibe I got when I arrived at this tea garden, and it just felt different, and I knew that I wanted to work with them. They had the certifications. They weren't using pesticides. They were doing like very, I don't even think they would say, they're not certified regenerative yet, but we're trying to help them get there because they're
mm,
doing all the right things.
mm,
They're not using any machines. There's no tilling. Everything's plucked by hand.
mm.
This tea garden, it's combined about 7,000 acres.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's split between, there's one big cooperative, and then it's called Sorwate, and that's, I think, 3,000 acres. And then they partner with a number of small farm holders around the area, which forms another cooperative. And so there's about another 4,000 there. Um, and all together, and then they've got the factory. So they have trucks that go through the region or the district, pick up tea leaves every day. We're harvesting year round. So the tea plants in Rwanda typically create new growth every 7 to 10 days,
Mm.
and they love rain. So the more rain, the better. It's high elevation, so the mountains here are 6,000 feet. It's really cool at night, which tea loves. Sun comes out during the day, or it's raining. So the weather's perfect for tea. The climate, people need jobs, and they're using cover crops, bird friendly, shade grown, all the right things. It's
Is
awesome.
Sarah, is that the default in Rwanda? Is that the cultural norm of like you're pretty much organic and regenerative? You're not going to have a lot of inputs or or no inputs, or is there a lot of like commodity conventional type production and this is abnormal? Like what's the compare contrast?
It seems like this is the default. I will say, I'm sure there's other crops being grown more conventional now as things
Mm-hmm.
do become more developed and modern, and people are getting access to free government fertilizer. And
Mm.
so there is a risk that without education, people will turn to those short term solutions. They see the promise of big, perfect, bright red tomatoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that's concerning to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it is the default. I mean, I think Rwanda is quite advanced in terms of like environmental education. And for example, plastic is not allowed in the country. And
Wow.
so they'll check your
Wow.
suitcase. Yeah, I tell all my guests,
And
like,
here we are struggling with, bag bans at a single grocery store, not
Right.
in the
I
country.
know.
That's insane in an
Yeah, I
awesome
know.
way.
And they will
Yeah.
take it out of your suitcase if you arrive with like Ziploc bags.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, the one like strange exception is all the water is in plastic bottles. So there's
Mm-hmm.
still that,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't understand how that, but everything's reused. Like you're not going to see trash on the street anywhere. So if I have to travel, if I've got a plastic bottle of water, there's a child like somewhere nearby waiting for me to finish that so they can take the
Mm-hmm.
bottle to do something with it.
Wow.
I want to stay a little bit more on the agronomy side while we're there, because to me, tea, the plant itself is perennial. It's always in the ground,
Yeah.
correct? And you mentioned cover crops. So, like, let's spend a little bit more time talking about how non-regenerative tea is grown and the specific practices taking place in this regenerative system, where they're adding cover crops or some level of biodiversity, and the potential impact that has on the tea itself.
Hmm. Well, I think, and I'm not, because I'm not a tea farmer, so I don't want to be like, I'm not an expert with this. And I will say, I know Rwandan tea. I don't know a lot about tea grown in other parts of the world. What
Mm-hmm.
I do know is that our plants in Rwanda are more resilient. They're younger. So tea was only introduced in Rwanda in the 70s. And I think the combination of like the age and health of our plants combined with the weather, the soil conditions, it's very volcanic, and just these regenerative practices is creating more of a resilient plant than some of the other. I know parts of Asia, tea plants are becoming extinct.
I'm really
So,
curious because like 50-year-old tea doesn't sound that young. Like when you think
oh,
about it,
really?
like a plant being 50 years old.
Yeah.
But and I know you said you're not an expert, but I'm just like thinking to myself, like how old are some tea plants? Are they hundreds of years old? You
Oh,
know, that's
yeah.
an interesting question. I have no
China.
idea.
Yeah. I don't know when the first tea plant, I mean, it, so tea grows very deep roots. And if it's continually pruned, which it should be in a tea garden, then it can live indefinitely. Yeah. I don't know what the oldest tea, that would be
AC is looking it up right now. I see it on his face.
Google Gemini says tea plants typically live 30 to 50 years, but some can live for hundreds or even thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
And we think we're so smart and we're the elevated species, you know?
I know. I wonder when they put it to bed and they're like, all right, this tea plant has had a good life.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess
No
they're
idea.
always watching the root system and checking the health. And we also have a tea nursery at the garden, so they're constantly creating like new plants. And I think this came with the Yogi interview at the same farm. So we have like lemongrass and other plants growing along with the tea, and that also helps with biodiversity. Um, I think what else? I mean, it's the plant itself is amazing at sequestering carbon. I think better than most plants, and part of that is the root system, and part of it is just the fact that it is perennial. We use terracing in the way that it's planting too. We capture rainwater. What else?
When you say capture rainwater and you mentioned how much it rains, I'm assuming that there is no irrigation. It's all naturally watered. Amazing.
We produced last year 6.6 million pounds at this one tea garden.
Wow.
So that's dry processed. And
And
it's
this is the
about a
7,000 acre
4-to-1
farm.
ratio.
This is the 7,000 acre.
Yeah.
So, and the factories are run off of, they're burning wood in the forest and they're eucalyptus. So they're using wood that's also growing back quite quickly.
Wow.
But that 6.6 million pounds dry is 26 million pounds wet. Fresh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
But they're taking, I mean, so after processing, they're taking what's left that's not sold and processed as tea. They're taking the scraps, putting it back into the tea garden. They're composting.
Nice. Sarah, I want to circle back to the original impetus for like starting a brand and moving away from just the purely nonprofit work was the economic and social impact, right? Uplifting these people economically. So is that just coming from the fact that you guys are another good paying customer that, you know, builds a market for these folks? Are you giving a certain percent of the proceeds? Is there something like unique about that? Like what is the social impact economic piece?
So we are fair trade certified. We do pay a fair trade premium on top of our regular tea price as well, which is an extra 50 cents per pound.
Wow.
And I'm also officially an importer. So now I'm bringing in, we just brought our first full container of tea in last year.
Nice.
Which is really exciting.
Congrats.
So I'm able to buy directly from these farmer cooperatives, but now I'm also reselling some of the tea to other manufacturers. So we work with a big kombucha co-manufacturer here, and they sell across the country. So I'm really, my goal is to introduce more people to Sarilla and healthier beverage, make sure they have that optionality when they're out socializing or at home here in the States. But coupled with that is making a bigger impact with the tea farmers. And with just Sarilla, like it's not enough right now. You know, hopefully we'll get to that point where we're buying everything they can make. But they still have more supply than we can buy. So that's why I want to introduce it to other people and other brands. And our formulation is unique, so I'm really not worried about people copying what we're doing. I don't believe in that. I think if something's too easy to copy, it might not be worth doing.
Yeah.
So also this tea garden sells to other parts of the world, parts of UK, parts of Asia. They even sell to tea growing regions that can't produce enough tea for their own population.
Wow.
But part of our mission too, even beyond financial, is, like I said before, offering people the opportunity to discover Rwanda and to maybe dive in, whether you can travel there or not, to really learn more about it beyond the genocide, and hopefully to be inspired by what's going on there since 1994. And then I think just bringing this human element to, like, these are universal truths. It's not just about being American or being Rwandan or being an assault survivor or being sober. Like, we have so many labels. And so for me, my goal now is to build a brand as big as we can, that we have a platform where people are actually going to listen. And I think that's what this is all about. Like, yes, we need to be profitable. Yes, we want to be like known across the country in terms of our brand recognition, but it's really like, that's where we can make a difference, is people know us, they know the brand, and when we speak up, they listen, and hopefully we can make an impact. And I think the greatest impact we can make on consumers is inspiring an individual to, our slogan is really tap into your inner power. And that's what it's about. It's like inspiring you to have the courage to make the change in your life that you've been wanting to make, and to help make that easier. And part of that is being of service in the world. So, oh, by the way, you're also making a difference because we buy directly from farmer cooperatives in Rwanda. And yes, we did just join 1% for the planet. So we did, that was like a big push to do that. Because for years, like, I've wanted to make that just commitment to, okay, it's not about profitable. It's about, we're going to allocate 1% of all of our sales, whether we're profitable or not, to causes that we care about. And one of them is the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund. They do work in Rwanda. We'll continue to work with people in Rwanda. I've also invested in another farm in Rwanda that we haven't mentioned yet, but this is a small cooperative of women in the Western province, and we're growing herbs there. So that is a fully regenerative farm, and I'm not yet importing those ingredients, but we'll get there. So that's a big passion project for me. I've been funding some of that development myself, and having survived Hurricane Helene here in Asheville in September, and just looking over the past few months of how can we take care of ourselves and our own company and survive and thrive, but also like really try to give back to our community. So we are allocating that 1% of the 1% of the planet money to some local nonprofits here in Western North Carolina that are helping with the rebuild effort, as well as other communities where we work, including Rwanda.
I love the mission. I love the story. I think it's a really inspiring, I don't want to like inspiring tale, but a story of finding opportunity and figuring out how to.
Tails.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it felt like I thought of a Fiefel's tale, or Feifel, whatever that Feifel goes west, an American tale. I don't know. There's a weird segue in my brain.
That's because it's going to become a movie someday.
I would love to watch it. I'd go on opening night. But it's really inspiring to see like the type of work you're doing and the level of intentionality and creativity in bringing some reciprocal relationships to this region of the world that seems like it's in, I don't want to say in desperate need, but needs some level of revitalization. And even before we started recording, like your passion for this region just like exudes out of you. I do want to pivot to what I like to call my comfort zone and talk about launching this brand at retail. So
I might need a Sarilla.
Yeah, I would love one. I'll have one maybe tomorrow. But you mentioned all the things you did wrong with Silverback, And I'm curious, like when did the rebrand take place? And you talked about the fresh market launch, Sprouts is coming on board. What are some of the other things that have taken place in like the commercialization of the cans specifically?
Mm. Um, what have I done right? Is that your
Yeah,
question?
what have
Yeah,
you
where are
learned,
you
and
now?
where have you pivoted? And yeah, walk us through some of the phases after the difficult launch.
I'm still learning. Yeah, it's not like
Mhm.
smooth sailing, but I guess, I mean, you guys know that. There's
Yeah.
always something. Um, I don't really like the word pivot so much because we're always just figuring it out and new
Mhm.
opportunities come up that we couldn't have planned for. I think right now my focus really is on where can we make a difference in someone's life? Like where are people looking for something like this and they're not finding it?
Mm.
So as obvious as it might be to sell in to like Whole Foods or other natural grocery stores, I feel like the opposite is true. Where it's like
Mhm.
that's where people have options. Maybe not something exactly like this, but it's very, I work with some other founders now, or they just come to me for advice. And I'm like, don't always go for the obvious thing because
Mhm.
that's where everyone else is. And like what I found is grocery is probably the hardest place to build a brand.
Yes.
So my
Yes.
focus is
Definitely
really
the
on,
most expensive place
oh
to build a
yeah,
brand.
Yes.
yeah, I will say hardest if you're bootstrap, let's say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but can you build a brand outside of the store? And
Mhm.
then, as hard as it is to resist, like those invitations to go into stores, only say yes if you're really ready to support
Mhm.
with promotions, with demos. And I don't believe in mistakes really, because if we learn from them, there, it's going to be opportunity for growth. But that first chain, with the fresh market that we tested in, we were there for a couple years, amazingly. But I had no idea, like, it's from New York down to Florida.
Right.
So we had that many states for that many stores spread out. How in the world are you going to support that many states? Because it's really not
Mhm.
about like one chain, it's about all those different markets, all those different shoppers.
Right.
Um, so for me, and so for Sprouts to come to us was quite a surprise because I wasn't actually pursuing grocery right now. But, we'll always look at every opportunity as it comes along, but I'm not going to say yes to everything anymore. I am really passionate about getting Sarilla into hotels, into places where people are traveling, sports stadiums, all those places where you're like, why am I only seeing Coke and Pepsi products? That's another story because that's a tough one. Like that's the barriers to entry are quite
Yeah.
high in some of those channels because of the Coke and Pepsi exclusive contracts and exclusive with air quotes. There is room to get around that if you can provide a product that's non-competing.
Mhm.
But I think that's why a lot of brands don't go for it because it's just harder. It's like harder to get the yeses. And then you've got to contend with these contracts. But I don't know. I'm up for the challenge, and like I'm just so excited when I see Sarilla or another brand like ours in places like that where it used to just be you've got alcohol, you've got maybe a club soda, or you've got Coke or Pepsi products.
Yeah,
Where
I think. Oh, AC,
But
you go
there's
ahead.
so many channel, Beverage has so many channels we could sell, and that's part of the challenge is just we could sell everywhere. It's like coolers
right.
everywhere you look, calling your name.
Where are you going in Sprouts and how are you positioning it? Like are you going center
We're
store?
going
Are
to
you
the
going to the cold
innovation
box?
center,
Okay.
so
Nice.
yeah. So we have
Nice.
to sell through this product
Yeah.
over the course of really 90 days, and then but it's the non-alc buyer we're talking with, so
Okay.
they are pretty innovative in terms of building out that non-alc set.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's a great opportunity to show that we can do it. We're just putting together the pieces of like what does the marketing plan look like for such a short period of time to
Mhm.
prove ourselves because I think there's this other risk of like doing too much promotion if and we can't run sales during that time at the innovation. So
Right.
it's like, do you want to spend um, on like multiple demos for every store, or do all kinds of online ads. Is that going to be sustainable in the long run? Do you want to make that push just in the short run to prove a case? But then the question is, are you really proving a case? Or did people just pick up your product because it was essentially free? And then if they greenlight you for the whole chain on a permanent, semi-permanent basis, are you going to be successful, right? So, or are people only going to buy this if it's on sale?
Right.
And whereas like outside of the grocery store, people are just less price sensitive as well.
Right.
I love like these new regen displays that we're seeing in stores. I think that's great. We've also seen like we're woman owned certified. We see some of these WeBank displays coming up. And I know buyers are looking, retail buyers are looking for these brands and these certification, but we're still collectively, we still have like a lot of work to do to make the case for the end consumer, especially when it comes to price difference. And that's where, again, I think grocery store shoppers, myself included, we look at every 20 cent, 50 cent difference. Whereas, if you're out and about, or if you're traveling or on the go, you're just not as likely to care about the price.
I think it's a really interesting strategy you have. And as somebody who, is probably as close to having the natural channel pedigree as anyone, with my career arc in the industry, I think it's really interesting to approach something different. And I think you're right. Like the traveler's mindset, like if I'm traveling, I'm looking to try something new. I don't necessarily want to have the same thing I go and buy at the grocery store on a regular basis. So I think that's a really interesting concept. And if you can get some level of market saturation in a specific geography in alt channel, I think it primes the consumer who's ready for grocery, right? So I think I'm really curious. Like I want to watch the growth and see like, will this work? Because it's an alternative strategy I haven't really heard of, especially in beverage. So I'm super curious to see how it goes. And it sounds like it's going well so far.
Yeah, micro markets and pantries. We have a broker too. He's teaching me a lot about that. He's been working with Canteen. We just got approval from Food Buy, which is a national approval, which is huge. And then our partnership with Vistar. We also are working with Cheney Brothers here in the Southeast for food service. And yeah, when you check into a hotel, you also generally more relaxed. You generally have more time. You're going to read the label. And then also I think a lot of long-term relationships with products and people are built in situations like that because people have memories. They'll then reference your product with a memory. Hopefully it's a good one of what they were doing when they discovered it. Whereas in the grocery store, it's just much harder to capture someone's attention. And I'm on the fence with demos. I think when you run the numbers, they don't make a lot of sense. And it's great to be able to get out there and tell your story at a table and give out samples. But usually that is people like to meet the founder, and that's not scalable. So it's then you're relying on demo agencies across the country to do it for you. And I think if we can demo our product where we're also getting paid to demo it, so we're working with Meta now, and so people who work at the Meta campuses are coming in, they're getting free product, they're getting basically an opportunity to sample products for free and hopefully fall in love with them. We're getting paid, and they're getting a free product, someone's paying for it. So that's another opportunity, an example of a way to demo your product. And that's how I got started. Put it on tap. I'm getting paid for those kegs. We're now sampling it out to people who come into the bar and want to taste it.
I'm curious. We talk ad nausea on this show about the current state of regenerative claims and positioning in grocery retail, which we can spend some time on that today and obviously hear what the Sarilla perspective is there. But I would love to hear your perspective on these other channels for that, Sarah. In these on-premise food service sales or in these hospitality, does it matter at all? Or is it just cool packaging, tastes good, it's healthy, and it's something that, solves that problem that you mentioned earlier? That's just something that isn't available. Does the social impact piece matter at all? Does the organic piece matter at all? Does the regenerative piece matter at all in those channels? Or is it really just those other things that I already mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I know I just logged into my Range Me dashboard, I think yesterday, to look at the insights. There's actually a section on all the certifications, and you can see what's trending most in terms of the searches, and
Mm.
that's all retail buyers. And or USD Organics number one. Kosher was actually showing up as number two,
Hmm.
and there's 2 pages. That's how long the list is. I know that fair trade
Wow.
certification was on page 2. We need to have ROC or something up there with regen, but
Mhm.
um, I think it's very regional. I think I'm probably in the toughest region in the country in terms of
Mm.
like awareness and high level of value for regen and some of these other like better for you claims. I think the Southeast in general is a little slower to come on to that, but maybe the Midwest, I'm not sure. So with vending and micro markets, pantries, it really just depends. I mean, we have break rooms, right? People are sitting down and like grabbing this with their lunch. I think they really are sitting there and like looking at the label.
Yeah.
And I think even if they don't fully, even if they didn't purchase something or pick it up because it was regenerative, having it on the package, which it's the same reason I've always had alcohol free on the front. And people would be like, well, obviously. And I'm like,
Mhm.
but no, because it
Mhm.
makes you think about it. It's like, wait, first of all, I'm sober. I can't have any alcohol. And there's a lot of confusing packages now. So I want to make
Mm.
that really obvious. And we added regenerative to the front on the top, even though we're not certified yet as a product. We wanted to call out like the source of our ingredients.
Mhm.
And so it helps people think like, well, what does that even mean? I'm going to quickly
Mm.
search on that. And that's how education happens. I mean, I worked in fair trade certification in my early 20s, and that was probably the first thing I was really passionate about, was like making a difference in that social world. And like for me, it was finding out that there were unfair things happening. So
Mm.
saying something's fair, I mean, one could argue that's a little BS. Like, really, what does that mean? I mean, how did they even like create a certification around that? But it makes you think, okay, if this brand is calling out that it's fair or direct trade or something, that means the other ones aren't. I don't know.
Mhm.
I need to look into that. And
Mhm.
that's where the dialogue starts.
I think
Mm.
you're spot on, especially with that fair trade call out. For me, in order to truly understand what regenerative agriculture is, I had to first understand what conventional or industrial agriculture is. And,
Hmm.
I think that's part of the complexity and like why it's so difficult for people to grasp this, because most people don't truly understand the nutritional and or environmental impacts of industrial farming. Right. So there's a big learning curve to get to the point of like, oh, regular farming is bad, regenerative agriculture is different. It's actually beneficial. That somehow means the nutritionals are better for me, better for the
Mm.
environment. There's a social impact. It's just so complex.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good point that you got to try to like put it in people's face and just maybe spark some level of curiosity. And the more that happens across the board, the more likely it is somebody will actually pick up their phone or Google or watch Kiss the Ground or whatever other
Yeah.
like entry point into the movement already exists.
Yeah. And I think the more we can do, I mean, we try to sprinkle in with social media and whatnot. Like we have a spill the tea section. Like, did you know? Just like fun facts. People love going online and learning. I mean, my son's 14. It's basically TikTok's like his Google. So
Right.
Sunday morning was, oh my God. Okay, what
Right.
what are we gonna
Right.
do here? And I remember he goes to log in and he's like, it's black, mom.
Yeah.
Like there's no, I can't
Yeah.
get in. And I was like, are you okay? Like really, I was like trying not to make fun. This is serious. Like
Right.
I was really like, are you okay? It's
Mhm.
like, yeah,
Did you
I'll
give him
be
a chamomile to calm him down a little bit?
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, let's sit down, let's make
Yeah.
a plan. And I remember I was like, where are you going to go now?
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he goes, oh, I'm just going to go to Instagram Reels. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay. And then it was back on later that day. So we're all good. But,
Yeah.
um, but I knew it's not like they're going to suddenly have a like detox. Like, no, they're going to find another place to go. And he, later that day in the car, he's like, Mom, you understand, like, I use TikTok like to search things. Like, I'm learning things. I'm like, he has so many random facts in his mind, and hopefully mostly good. But I think that's a huge opportunity for us as a movement to really like, go to that generation, go to people who are looking online. Did you know? And also not throwing like other practices under the bus where it's like, maybe it's not good versus bad, but I want to actually have more conversations with people who don't understand why this is beneficial and maybe are very adamant about the way they do it being right, because I want to learn, how do we address those people? Like, what is the barrier there? And what do we need to cross over in order for this to be more accepted? Because I know they're out there, but I think a lot of us doing this work are in a bubble. And, it's like we live and breathe this stuff, and we're buying this stuff, and we weren't buying products with red dye number 5 in it anyway. So like, okay, that's great. It's coming out of our system, the food system. But a lot of people just don't even think about it and don't know. And like you said, they don't even really think about the origin of their food to begin with. So what's that beginner conversation look like?
Yeah, it's a great
And
question.
unfortunately, I think some of it is like a scare, when people feel scared or disgusted because they see a picture of what is actually happening. And that's what happened with me with fair trade. And I was doing some work with like anti-sweatshops back in the day and activism around that cause. Like, I had no idea. Like, I'm like, there's still child slave labor in the Congo. There's still children mining, for some of these minerals that we're using in our cell phones and EV cars. Like, that is still happening. And I know some people just don't even want to look at it, or they don't believe it and they need to see the facts. But maybe using some of that imagery of like how, when is the planet going to become a desert if we continue to farm it in these industrial ways? And what does that actually mean for the air that you're breathing and the quality of your life? And I think for people who have survived a natural disaster, and like for people in LA right now, for us in Western North Carolina, we had over a day, like, we had no communication to the outside world. We had no power, no water that was livable. Everything was shut down. We had no way to leave, no gas stations, like everything, even money in the bank was useless. And I think those are experiences and moments where we all get to this question of like, okay, like things are changing. And so how do we want to live the rest of our life? And for some people, it's going to be getting back to basics, living more simply, but really looking at the health of our own bodies and the health of our planet and our immediate surroundings.
I want to try to take that full circle and build on the momentum you just generated. And what's so cool about a brand like Sarilla and many of the brands that we feature here is like, how do we support all of those initiatives doing the right thing in a way that's convenient and accessible, and I can do on a daily basis or multiple times a day? And that's what I love about brands in this category, right? And that are so mission focused. But I want to pivot now and talk about, what's next for Sarilla. Obviously, the Sprouts launch is looming. It's close. We've already discussed a lot about your plans for food service and other things, but are there any future innovations you can talk about, whether that's, new SKUs, different categories, other retail plans, other travel plans? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, it's super boring because like, and intentionally, I mean, I'm at a place as a founder and brand builder of keeping it as simple as possible right now, which is not easy for me personality wise. And it started getting really simple, I would say, like right before, Hurricane Helene. I know I've said it, like 9/27 was the date. Thank goodness because when that happened, like we were in a good spot. Very simple. Okay, our strategy is this and this channel. I've got this broker. These are our goals for production this year. We've got an amazing co-packer now, like, and just staying super focused and no distractions and learning how to not only say no, but just like block, spam, delete, and I used to be like just so easily excited and I get inspired and I want to be nice. And it's like, no, this is a time just focus, keep it simple, and build something that has legs, traction, is sustainable in at least a couple channels. And I've also learned like to set my ego aside. And I think that's a big risk with a lot of founders. We get so excited. We think our products like part of us, and we need to see it on the shelf here because I shop there, my family shops there, my friends go in there. They're asking me, why aren't you in Whole Foods? And I'm like obsessed with being there. I mean, that was me for a while and I couldn't let it go. And sometimes that fuels our growth, but sometimes it's just a complete and utter distraction. And it's like, no, that's not where the universe wants you to be right now. Look at what's right in front of you. And I will say I had this thing happen last year and I work with a great business coach, performance coach, by the way. We meet every week online, and that's helped me a lot with this whole process. But something happened last year. I was like, okay, this is the number, right? Like, this is the number I want to commit to with my new co-packer that I'm moving in with for 2025. This is the number of units I want to hit. And so, okay, backing out of that, how are we actually going to do that? Okay, we need to like line up the sales and accounts in advance. And we're not going to get there, sadly, like we're not going to get there with natural independent stores. The volume is not there. Where are the high volume accounts? And okay, my coach is always saying, ask who, not how. So for me, that's been the question, who, not how. And then I meet this broker and he's like, he gives me, okay, we're getting along, like building the relationships, feeling good. And then out of nowhere, he gives me this forecast for, what he thinks we can very conservatively do just in this one vending micro market channel for 2025. I kid you not, I hadn't shared my numbers with him at all, matched it to a T.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hell yeah.
And it was
The
like,
universe.
okay, you just can't turn away from that, And I'm like, all right, thank you so much. Like that just simplified everything. And I'll tell you what, like my friends might never see my product like in those micro markets, and that's okay. And people are like, where are you sold? And I'm like, you'll never know.
Well, Sarah, I really love and hate your answer for so many reasons. I'll start with why I hate it. I think, and this is a symptom of the era we live in natural food, where innovation and newness is like the big, bright, shiny object that I think so many founders and even non-founders focus on, right? This is how we grow. And your answer of like blocking and tackling, like focusing on the core of what the business needs to do to grow the way it needs to grow, is refreshing in its simplicity. So I think it's a really cool answer. I don't think we've had one like this before on the pod, so I really appreciate that learning opportunity.
I will say we had a great holiday. We had some traction online, and this might help someone listening, where over the years I've really struggled to find a good formula for online sales where we're able to cover shipping. I mean, with a heavy 10-pound 12 case box, we're using the same box to ship online as we send into a store. Dealing with damage, like all the things, like the cost, and then trying to make it work on Amazon and the fees. And I decided last year to finally get a branded sampler box so we could ship a beautiful box to retail reviews. That was the only reason. I wasn't even going to sell it. And then, it just started like taking off organically. And now this became like our number one online product is this branded. It originally was meant for a shipper, but then over the holidays, it became a gift item. And it's
It
6
is
cans.
beautiful.
It's one
It's
of each
very nice.
kind. You're going to get it hopefully tomorrow. And I mean, that's just an interesting experience too, where it's like sometimes you step back and when you stop trying, the answer just shows itself. And that's another example of this just became very simple because if we wanted to this year, that could be the only thing we sell online. Why not just do the sampler, and then have that as a gift item? I'll plant the seed for this. I was envisioning like a regen brand gift box where we could, especially it's probably too late, like Earth, maybe you're doing this, but Earth Month, have like a curated box and the message, because we drop this box off and I walk into a UPS now and they're like, oh, and they know who I am because of this box, because it's got our website, a message on the outside, and it's like actually marketing itself as it's going across the country.
You're killing me, Sarah, because Kyle wants to do exactly what you just said
Yes,
so bad, and I keep telling him no for
do it.
many
I appreciate it, Sarah. You keep talking.
constraining reasons.
AC, don't cut her off,
What we
man.
could
Let
do?
her
I mean,
expand.
okay, so we could have like a QR. I know someone, you probably know someone too, who could do this, but we tell the origin story in less than 30 seconds and give people the opportunity to travel to origin, to the farm, if they can't physically go there. And so I remember my first business was this fair trade coffee shop in Vermont. I was like 23 years old. And the only certified fair trade coffee I had available was Equal Exchange at the time, OG's, based in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And they would give us these paper cups, and on the outside of the cup was like basically crop to cup. So it was the story all the way from the coffee farmer to your cup and where to go and how. And it was on the cup, but like we could do that digitally, with this gift box. And I think that's what they need to see. They need to see what it is. Like, who are the people on the other side? Who are the people in the farms, in the fields? And I know many of them are here in the US growing, all those ingredients. But I think that would be an awesome storytelling opportunity on this gift box that you're going to do.
I totally agree, and I think I love that you said that we are going to do. Yes,
Yeah,
and
I caught that too.
If you had the founder, in the field wherever for every single brand, I mean, talk about like a powerful, and to your point, keep it short, 30 seconds per brand. But that's impactful, and you really get to create that connection with these consumers and like show them what they're supporting and why it's important.
What is the common, like, it's Mother Earth, and that's why I would love to launch this for like Earth Day. It's Mother Earth holding us all together and showing the faces of people around the world that are coming together to bring this product into your home. And then we're all standing on Earth, like the soil. I'm starting to see, like, as we really dig into soil health and nutrient density, the soil is really the skin of the earth, right? Our skin is our largest organ. It's holding us together. And I think we need to think more about that in terms of the planet.
Love that.
It's a great visual.
Love that.
Kind of gross, but
I'm in for that. I'm still out on the gift box, but we're working on it, and we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but
well, I have a box maker.
It's just, I think, a little bit logistically and cost challenging to like do it and try and sell it, like for our organization right now, to become like an actual vendor of something. But I don't want to open that can of worms, because then Kyle and I are going to verbally arm wrestle on tape.
Well, what we could do is just put it out there to the community. Like, if brands want to get together on their own, and we could collab and like do some different themed boxes throughout the year for different holidays, and then call out like the work that you're doing with the coalition on the box as well. I think that's another option. Maybe even
Sure, we'll connect offline. Don't worry.
Yeah,
we'll connect offline.
We're working on some stuff.
We'll figure this out.
Yeah.
We also have like a huge demand for our, I know I said no innovation. I didn't actually say no innovation. I just said it's going to be boring. But we had a lot of demand for our products over the holidays, like being in glass bottle format for parties, for tables and restaurants. So we are starting like our R&D for our ginger and our spiced apple flavor to have those ready in 750 ml bottles in time to present to retailers this summer
Nice.
when they're doing their holiday buying. So we're talking to some stores just about like maybe holiday displays, limited time on that. And I think that really brings the occasion like into play more when you see that glass bottle on the table in elevated settings.
Nice. Well, this has been super fun. Learned a ton. I'm so happy that we finally had you on, Sarah. We will take you home with the question that you know well since you've listened to some episodes, but the one that we ask everybody, which I feel like I say this every episode now, but we've been talking about it for 90 minutes, right? But how do we get Regen Brands to have 50% market share by 2050?
Yeah, we need to work together with each other. But we need to bring everyone into the conversation. We need to start talking with the people who aren't part of it right now and maybe are even resistant to it, and like be at the same table to understand what is the barrier there.
Love that.
Yeah,
Community.
collaboration. You know, we talk about it a lot. We think it's super important. So yeah.
To be alone is to die. The Rwandan wisdom.
Bringing it
Be
back.
alone is to die.
What a great podcast host, man! What a finish. Well done.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, for those before we leave, for those who are interested in learning more about the brand, go to drinksarilla.com. That's SARILLA.com. And check it out. Beautiful packaging. I can't wait to try some flavors. So thank you for sending those over. Shame on UPS for being late.
I know. My pleasure. My pleasure. And if anyone wants to collab and is part of the network, reach out to me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Sara Delaney. Thank you guys. This has been a lot of fun.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Sarah. For transcripts, show notes, and more information on this episode, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, the Regen Brands Weekly, and follow our Regen Brands LinkedIn page to stay in the know on all the latest news, insights, and perspectives from the world of regenerative CPG. Thanks so much for tuning into the Regen Brands podcast. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, your talent, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.